The lights on the bridge of the Terran Hope flickered as the ship received an incoming transmission. Ambassador Lisa Carter stood up from her chair and straightened her blue diplomatic uniform. She had been waiting for this call for 3 days. Ever since the Galactic Council had requested an urgent meeting. Captain Jake Morrison walked over to stand beside her. His weathered face showed concern as he watched the communication officer work at her station. The young woman's hands moved quickly over the controls, trying to establish a clear connection. "Ambassador, we're getting a signal from the Council." "Station," the officer reported. "It's coming through on all frequencies. They want to make sure we can't ignore it." Lisa nodded and took a deep breath. Put it through to the main screen. The large display at the front of the bridge came to life. With a flash of blue light, the image stabilized to show a massive chamber filled with strange beings. At the center stood High Counselor Zethkar, a creature that looked like a giant insect walking on 2 legs. His black eyes reflected the light as he stared directly at the camera. Behind him, representatives from 12 different alien species sat in a curved row of seats. Lisa recognized a few of them from her diplomatic training. The Valkyrie delegate looked like a walking tree with glowing spots on its bark. The Morthi representative resembled a large lizard with purple scales. All of them were watching the screen with what appeared to be hostile interest. "Humans of the vessel Terran Hope," Zethkar began. His voice was translated by the ship's computer, but it still carried an unpleasant clicking sound. "You will listen to what the Galactic Council has decided." Jake stepped forward slightly, his hand moving to rest on his sidearm. Lisa noticed the gesture and put her own hand on his arm to stop him. This was a diplomatic meeting, not a battle. "We are listening, High Counselor," Lisa replied in her most professional voice. Zethkar's mandibles clicked together in what might have been satisfaction. "Good. The Council has reviewed the actions of your species since you began traveling among the stars. We have found your behavior to be aggressive and dangerous to the peace of the galaxy." The insect-like being turned slightly to gesture at the other representatives. "The peaceful species of the Council have reported numerous incidents of human interference. You have established colonies and systems that other species considered theirs. You have taken resources without permission. You have spread your violent culture to worlds that were once calm." Lisa felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. Most of the claims were either false or greatly exaggerated. Humans had been careful to avoid conflicts with other species during their expansion into space. "Furthermore," Zethkar continued, "your species has shown a disturbing tendency toward independence. You refuse to acknowledge the authority of the Council. You make decisions without consulting the established galactic government. This behavior threatens the order that has kept peace for 10,000 years. The Valkyrie delegate leaned forward and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through leaves. "The humans are like a disease spreading through the galaxy. They must be controlled before they corrupt other species with their ideas of freedom." Several other representatives made sounds of agreement. The Morthi delegate hissed something that the translator couldn't process, but the tone was clearly hostile. Zethkar raised one of his forearms for silence. "The Council has decided that the human species must pay compensation for the damage they have caused. The amount has been calculated based on the cost of maintaining peace in the regions where humans have been active." Lisa felt her heart sink. She had heard rumors about the Council's protection fees, but she had hoped they were just stories meant to frighten new species. "The payment required is 50 trillion galactic credits," Zethkar announced. "This will be paid immediately to the Council treasury. In addition, humanity will agree to limit their expansion to systems approved by the Council. All future human actions in galactic space will require Council permission." The bridge of the Terran Hope fell silent. Even the usual humming of the ship's system seemed to quiet. Lisa looked at Jake, who was staring at the screen with disbelief. 50 trillion credits? Jake whispered. "That's more money than exists on Earth." Zethkar's hearing was apparently better than they had expected. "The amount is not negotiable, Captain Morrison. The Council has access to detailed information about human economic capabilities. We know that your species can pay this amount. If you choose to do so, Lisa stepped forward again. High Counselor, surely we can discuss this matter. The amount seems excessive for a species that has been in space for less than a century. There is nothing to discuss, the insect being replied. Sharply, this is not a negotiation. This is a demand from the lawful authority of the galaxy. You will pay or you will face the consequences. The Morthi delegate stood up and spoke in a harsh, grating voice. Other species have tried to resist the Council's authority. The Jorvaki thought their military was strong enough to fight us. We turned their homeworld into glass. The Tellarni believed their technology could protect them. They now serve as laborers in our mining colonies. Zethkar nodded approvingly. The Council's patience is not unlimited. We have given humanity more freedom than most species because we hoped you would learn to follow galactic law. Instead, you have become more rebellious. The High Counselor moved closer to the camera, his black eyes filling the screen. You have 72 standard hours to deliver the payment to the Council station. During this time, all human ships will remain in their current positions. Any attempt to flee or to reinforce your military will be considered an act of war. Lisa felt sweat forming on her forehead despite the cool air on the bridge. And if we refuse to pay? Then the Council will take action to protect the galaxy from the human threat, Zethkar replied. We have a fleet of 300 ships ready to enforce our decision. Your 47 vessels would provide little resistance. The alien representatives began to rise from their seats, clearly considering the meeting over. Zethkar gave what might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell with his insect features. Choose wisely, humans. The Council has shown mercy to species that submit peacefully. Those who resist find that mercy is not offered twice. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in darkness except for the emergency lighting. Lisa stood, staring at the blank screen, her mind racing through the possible responses. Behind her, she could hear Jake giving orders to his crew in a quiet, controlled voice. Send a message to Earth immediately, Jake said. Priority Alpha, tell them we need to speak with the President right now. Lisa nodded, but she was already thinking about what came next. The Council had made their demand clear, and their threat was real. Now humanity had to decide whether they would bow to alien authority or stand up for their freedom. The clock was ticking, and the fate of the human species hung in the balance. The emergency meeting room in the White House was packed with people. President Helen Brooks sat at the head of the long table, her face serious as she listened to the reports coming in from around the world. The message from the Terran Hope had reached Earth just 6 hours ago, and every major leader on the planet was now connected by video link. General Patrick Stone stood beside a large screen showing star maps and fleet positions. His gray hair was perfectly combed, despite being called from his bed in the middle of the night. He had been studying the military situation since the first reports arrived. Madam President, General Stone began, the numbers are not good. Our intelligence suggests the Council has over 15,000 ships in their combined fleets. We have exactly 47 vessels that could be considered military craft, and most of those are exploration ships with basic weapons. President Brooks nodded slowly. She had been afraid of this since humanity first encountered other species in space. Earth's military had been built for fighting other humans, not alien civilizations with thousands of years of experience. What about their technology? She asked. Dr. Amy Walsh, the head of the Xenobiology Research Division, opened her tablet and began reading from her notes. She was a small woman with thick glasses, but her knowledge of alien species was greater than anyone else on Earth. The Council species have plasma weapons that can destroy entire cities with a single shot, Dr. Walsh said. Their shields can deflect most of our missiles and energy weapons. Their ships are faster than ours and can travel between star systems in hours instead of days. The Secretary of Defense, a large man named Carl Rodriguez, shook his head. So, we can't fight them and we can't run from them. What about the money? Can we actually pay 50 trillion credits? The Secretary of the Treasury, Maria Santos, pulled up financial reports on her computer. The entire gross domestic product of Earth is only about $200 trillion per year. Converting that to galactic credits and considering the exchange rate, we might be able to pay the amount, but it would require every nation on Earth to give up everything they have. President Brooks felt a cold weight in her stomach. And if we pay? Dr. Walsh looked up from her tablet. Based on our research of other species, payment is never the end. The Council uses economic warfare to control civilizations. Once a species pays the first demand, they become permanent debtors. She touched her tablet screen to bring up historical data. The Valkyrie paid a protection fee 300 years ago. They thought it would buy them peace. Instead, the Council kept raising the amount they owed. Now the Valkyrie work as servants throughout the galaxy, and every resource their planet produces goes to the Council. General Stone added more information. The Morthi tried to resist after they made their first payment. The Council response was immediate and brutal. They destroyed the Morthi capital city and enslaved the survivors. The Morthi military was completely destroyed in less than a week. President Brooks looked around the table at the faces of her advisors. Everyone looked tired and worried. The weight of making a decision for all of humanity was visible on their faces. What about negotiation? Asked the Secretary of State, Robert Kim. Maybe we can work out a payment plan or reduce the amount somehow. Dr. Walsh shook her head. Our research shows that every species that has faced this situation tried to negotiate. The Council always refuses. They see any attempt to bargain as a sign of weakness. At the back of the room, a young man raised his hand. Ryan Peters was a junior analyst in the State Department, and he normally would not speak in such an important meeting. But President Brooks had ordered that everyone with relevant information should be allowed to contribute. Excuse me, madam. President, Ryan said nervously. I've been studying the historical records of species that encountered the Council. I found something that might be important. President Brooks gestured for him to continue. What did you find? Ryan stood up and walked to the front of the room. He was clearly nervous about speaking to such high-ranking officials, but his voice grew stronger as he talked. Every species that the Council has successfully controlled followed the same pattern. They received the demand, they tried to negotiate or find a compromise, and eventually they either paid or were conquered. But I noticed something else. He paused to take a breath. In all the records I could find, no species has ever simply refused to pay without trying to negotiate first. Every single one tried to find a middle ground or make a deal. General Stone frowned. What's your point? My point is that the Council expects certain responses. They expect fear, they expect attempts to bargain, they expect submission. But they might not know how to handle a species that simply says no. Dr. Walsh looked interested. That's an interesting theory, but it's very dangerous to test. If you're wrong, humanity could be destroyed. If we pay or try to negotiate, we'll be enslaved anyway, Ryan replied. At least this way we keep our freedom, even if it's only for a short time. President Brooks considered this information. The room was quiet except for the sound of air conditioning and the distant traffic outside. Everyone was waiting for her to make a decision that would affect the future of the human race. General Stone, she said finally, if we refuse to pay, how long can we hold out against a Council attack? The general looked at his notes. With our current defenses, maybe a few days. If we're lucky, a week. But, Madame President, there is one thing that might help us. What's that? The Council has never fought a species like us. They're used to controlling civilizations through fear and economic pressure. They've never faced a species that was willing to fight to the death for their freedom. President Brooks stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the lights of Washington, D.C. stretching into the distance. Somewhere out there, millions of people were going about their normal lives, unaware that their future was being decided in this room. I want to speak with the leaders of every nation on Earth, she said. We need to make this decision together. This isn't just about America. This is about all of humanity. Over the next several hours, President Brooks spoke with prime ministers, presidents, and kings from around the world. The conversations were difficult and emotional. Some leaders wanted to pay the council's demand. Others wanted to try negotiating. A few wanted to fight regardless of the consequences, but as the discussions continued, something unexpected began to happen. Despite their different cultures and political systems, the leaders of Earth began to reach the same conclusion. They might disagree on many things, but they all shared one belief: freedom was worth more than safety. When the final vote was taken, the result surprised everyone in the room. Every single nation on Earth had made the same choice. For the first time in human history, the entire planet was united in a single decision. President Brooks looked around the room at her advisors. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have our answer. Now we need to figure out how to deliver it. The clock on the wall showed that humanity had less than 60 hours to respond to the Council's demand. The fate of the human species would soon be decided. The United Nations building in New York had never seen anything like this before. Every seat in the General Assembly was filled, and the tension in the room was so thick it could be cut with a knife. President Helen Brooks stood at the podium, looking out at the representatives from 193 nations. Behind her, a large screen showed the countdown timer. Humanity had 36 hours left to respond to the Galactic Council's demand. The fate of the entire human species would be decided in this room over the next few hours. Ladies and gentlemen, President Brooks began, we face the most important decision in human history. What we choose today will determine whether our children grow up as free beings or as slaves to an alien empire. The Chinese representative, Ambassador Li Wei, stood up from his seat. He was an older man with gray hair and a serious expression. Madam President, China has reviewed the military analysis. We cannot win a war against the Galactic Council. Our technology is centuries behind theirs. To fight would be suicide. Murmurs of agreement came from several other delegations. The Russian representative nodded, and the Japanese ambassador looked worried. Many of the smaller nations seemed frightened by the prospect of war. But what is the alternative? Asked the Brazilian delegate, Isabella Santos. She was a young woman who had been elected to represent her country only 2 years ago. If we pay this tribute, we become slaves. The research is clear about what happens to the species that submit to the Council. The British representative, James Crawford, stood up with his tablet in hand. Perhaps we could negotiate a smaller payment. Surely the Council would accept a reasonable compromise. We don't have to choose between total submission and total war. Dr. Amy Walsh, who had been invited to address the Assembly, stepped forward to the microphone. Mr. Crawford, with respect, that approach has been tried by every species the Council has encountered. The Valkyrie tried to negotiate, the Morthi tried to find a compromise. The Jorvaki attempted to pay a smaller amount. None of those strategies worked. She touched her tablet to display information on the screen behind her. The Council's pattern is always the same. They make a demand, they refuse to negotiate, and they follow through on their threats. The only variable is how the target species responds. The German Chancellor, Klaus Müller, raised his hand. Dr. Walsh, what you're suggesting is that we have no choice but to fight. But surely there must be some other option. What if we appealed to other species for help? The Council has made sure that no species is powerful enough to challenge them. Dr. Walsh replied, they deliberately keep their subjects weak and dependent. Any species that might help us has already been conquered or enslaved. The Indian representative, Priya Sharma, stood up. This is madness. We're talking about the extinction of humanity. There must be something we can do besides choosing between slavery and death. President Brooks stepped back to the podium. I understand everyone's concerns, but we need to face the reality of our situation. The Council has given us a choice that isn't really a choice at all. We can submit now and lose our freedom slowly, or we can resist and lose our freedom quickly. The French representative, Marie Dubois, spoke with passion in her voice. But if we fight, at least we fight as free beings. If we submit, we die as slaves. I would rather my children know that their parents died fighting for freedom than living on their knees. The room erupted in debate. Some representatives argued for payment, others for negotiation, and still others for resistance. Voices rose. As the different nations tried to make their positions heard, the Egyptian representative Ahmed Hassan called for order. We are not just deciding for ourselves, we are deciding for all of humanity. The people of Earth deserve to know what choice we are making for them. The people of Earth elected us to make these decisions, replied the Canadian representative Sarah Mitchell. They trust us to choose what is best for our species. The South African delegate, Nelson Mandela Jr., stood up slowly. He was the grandson of the famous freedom fighter, and his words carried special weight. My grandfather once said that freedom is not something that is given to you. It is something you must take for yourself. The Council is not offering us freedom. They are offering us the choice of how we want to lose it. The room fell quiet as his words sank in. Many of the representatives were nodding thoughtfully. The Australian representative, Jack Thompson, broke the silence. I've been thinking about what Dr. Walsh said earlier, about how no species has ever simply refused the Council's demands. Maybe that's because they were all thinking like politicians. What do you mean? Asked the Norwegian representative, Erik Larsen. I mean, they were all looking for a compromise, a deal, a way to minimize the damage. But sometimes there are situations where compromise is impossible. Sometimes you have to choose between right and wrong, not between bad and worse. The Swiss Representative Anna Hoffmann raised her hand. But the consequences of being wrong are so severe. If we guess incorrectly, humanity could be extinct within a week. If we submit, humanity is extinct anyway, replied the Israeli representative David Cohen. Maybe our bodies will survive, but our spirit will be dead. We'll be nothing more than animals in the Council's zoo. President Brooks looked around the room at the faces of the world's leaders. She could see fear in many of them, but she could also see determination. These people had been elected to lead their nations through difficult times, and this was certainly the most difficult time humanity had ever faced. I want to ask each of you a question, she said. When you go home tonight, what will you tell your children? Will you tell them that you chose safety over freedom? Or will you tell them that you chose to stand up for what is right, regardless of the cost? The room was silent for a long moment. Then the representative from Kenya, Grace Mongi, stood up. I call for a vote. All in favor of refusing the Council's demand, raise your hands. One by one, hands began to rise throughout the assembly. The Chinese representative hesitated for a moment, then raised his hand. The Russian delegate followed. The Japanese ambassador looked around the room, then slowly lifted her hand as well. President Brooks watched in amazement as every single hand in the room went up. 193 nations with different cultures, different governments, and different interests had all made the same choice. The vote is unanimous, she announced. Humanity refuses to pay the Galactic Council's tribute. The room erupted in applause, but it was not the happy applause of celebration. It was the solemn applause of people who knew they had just signed their own death warrant, but who were proud to do so as free beings. As the representatives began to file out of the assembly, President Brooks remained at the podium. She had to prepare humanity's response to the Council. There would be no long speeches, no explanations, no justifications. Just one word that would change the course of galactic history. She picked up her phone and called the communications center. This is the President. I need to send a message to the Terran Hope immediately. Tell Ambassador Carter that humanity has made its decision. The message would be simple, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. It would be the first time in galactic history that a species had refused the Council's demands without trying to negotiate. It would either be humanity's finest moment or its last, but either way, it would be delivered as a free species making a free choice. The Council station was the largest structure Ambassador Lisa Carter had ever seen. It was bigger than most moons, a massive sphere of metal and crystal that housed the government of the galaxy. Thousands of ships moved around it like insects. Around a hive carrying representatives from hundreds of different species, Lisa stood on the observation deck of the Terran Hope. watching the alien ships through the reinforced windows. In 2 hours, she would deliver humanity's response to the Galactic Council. The message from Earth had been simple and clear. President Brooks had spoken only one word, but that word would echo through the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison joined her at the window. His face was grim as he watched the Council fleet positioning itself around the station. "They're not taking any chances," he said. "I count at least 50 warships out there, and those are just the ones we can see." Lisa nodded. The Council clearly expected trouble. Word had spread through the galaxy that humanity was about to give their response, and representatives from dozens of species had arrived to witness the event. Most of them expected to see another species bow to the Council's authority. "Ambassador," Carter called the communications officer from her station. "The Council is requesting your immediate presence in the main assembly chamber. They say the galaxy is waiting for humanity's answer." Lisa took a deep breath and straightened her diplomatic uniform. She had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times, but she still felt nervous. What she was about to do had never been done before in the 10,000-year history of the Galactic Council. "Jake, if this goes badly, get the ship out of here as fast as you can," she said quietly. Jake shook his head. "We're not leaving without you." "That's an order, Captain." "If the Council decides to make an example of us, at least one human ship should survive to tell the story." Before Jake could argue, Lisa walked toward the shuttle bay. She had a job to do, and the entire human race was depending on her to do it right. The shuttle trip to the Council station took only 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Lisa sat alone in the passenger compartment, reviewing the message from Earth one more time. It was the shortest diplomatic communication in human history, but it might also be the most important. The docking bay of the Council station was enormous. Lisa's shuttle looked like a toy compared to the massive alien vessels that filled the space. As she walked down the shuttle ramp, she was met by a group of Council guards. They were tall, thin creatures with gray skin and large black eyes. They moved with mechanical precision as they escorted her through the station's corridors. The main assembly chamber was breathtaking. The ceiling was hundreds of feet high, and the walls were made of a crystal that seemed to glow with its own light. Thousands of seats were arranged in a perfect circle, each one occupied by a representative from a different species. Lisa had studied alien biology for years, but seeing so many different life forms in one place was overwhelming. There were creatures that looked like walking trees, others that resembled giant insects, and some that appeared to be made of living liquid. The diversity was incredible, but they all had one thing in common. They all served the Council. At the center of the chamber stood High Counselor Zethkar. The massive insect being was even more intimidating in person than he had been on the video screen. His forearms were crossed, and his black eyes reflected the light from the crystal walls. Behind him, the 12 senior council members sat in ornate chairs that seemed to be carved from single pieces of precious stone. As Lisa walked to the center of the chamber, she could feel thousands of eyes watching her. The aliens whispered among themselves in dozens of different languages, but the translation devices made it possible to understand some of what they were saying. "Another species about to submit?" said a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "The humans lasted longer than most, but they all break eventually," added another voice that reminded Lisa of a wind through leaves. "I wonder how much they will beg?" commented a third speaker with a voice like bubbling water. Lisa reached the center of the chamber and stopped. The whispering died away, and the massive room fell silent. She could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet. High Counselor Zethkar stepped forward. His footsteps echoed in the chamber as he approached. "Human Ambassador Lisa Carter," he said in his translated voice. "You stand before the assembled representatives of the galaxy. 200 species are watching to see how humanity responds to the lawful demands of the Galactic Council." Lisa stood straight and kept her face calm. She had trained for this moment, and she would not show fear. "The Council has been patient with your species," Zethkar continued. "We have allowed you to expand beyond your home system. We have permitted you to establish colonies on worlds that rightfully belong to the galaxy. We have even tolerated your refusal to acknowledge our authority." The High Counselor's mandibles clicked together as he spoke, but patience has limits. The galaxy requires order, and order requires obedience. Your species has been given a choice. Pay the tribute that your actions have earned, or face the consequences of continued defiance. Lisa could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. Every species in the galaxy had faced this moment. Every one of them had tried to negotiate, to find a compromise, to avoid the choice between submission and destruction. But humanity had decided to do something different. "The entire galaxy is watching, Ambassador Carter," Zethkar said. "What is humanity's answer to the demands of the Galactic Council?" The chamber was so quiet that Lisa could hear the hum of the station's power systems. Thousands of alien beings leaned forward in their seats, waiting to hear another species surrender their freedom. Lisa thought about Earth, about the billions of people who were depending on her to deliver their message. She thought about the children who would grow up either as free humans or as slaves to an alien empire. She thought about the leaders who had unanimously chosen to stand up for what was right. Regardless of the cost, she looked directly at High Counselor Zethkar, meeting his alien gaze without flinching. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. No, the single word hit the assembly like a physical blow. The silence that followed was complete and absolute. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire galaxy had stopped breathing. Then the chamber erupted in chaos. Alien representatives jumped to their feet, their voices creating a cacophony of sound that the translation devices couldn't handle. Some species were shouting in outrage, others were clicking or hissing in confusion, and a few were making sounds that had no human equivalent. High Counselor Zethkar stood frozen, his mandibles hanging open in shock. In 10,000 years of galactic history, no species had ever given such a direct refusal. The Council had procedures for handling negotiation attempts, for processing tribute payments, and for dealing with military resistance, but they had no protocol for a simple, absolute no. The Valkyrie representative was the first to recover from the shock. "Impossible!" he shouted in his wind-like voice. "No species refuses the Council. It cannot be done." The Morthi delegate hissed loudly. "The humans are too stupid to understand what they have done. They will learn the price of defying the galaxy." But among the chaos, Lisa noticed something interesting. While most of the Council species were shouting in anger, some of the representatives were sitting quietly, watching her with what looked like admiration. A few were even smiling, if their alien features could be said to smile. High Counselor Zethkar finally regained his composure. His forearms spread wide as he called for order. "Silence," he commanded. "The human has spoken, and the galaxy has heard." The chamber gradually grew quiet, though angry muttering continued from several sections. Zethkar's black eyes fixed on Lisa with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Ambassador Carter," he said, his voice dripping with menace, "you have just committed your entire species to destruction. The Council's patience is at an end. Humanity will learn what happens to those who defy the lawful authority of the galaxy." Lisa felt fear creep up her spine, but she kept her voice steady. "The human race has made its choice, High Counselor. We will live as free beings, or we will die as free beings. But we will not live as slaves." The words seemed to echo in the chamber long after she had spoken them. For the first time in galactic history, a species had chosen freedom over safety, death over slavery, defiance over submission. High Counselor Zethkar turned to address the assembled representatives. "Let this be a lesson to all species in the galaxy. This is what happens when order is challenged. This is the price of defying the Council's authority." He gestured to the guards who moved toward Lisa. "The human species has chosen war. War they shall have." As the guards escorted Lisa from the chamber, she could hear the alien representatives talking among themselves. But the tone had changed. Instead of the confident discussion of another species' submission, there was uncertainty, confusion, and, in some cases, something that sounded almost like hope. Lisa had delivered humanity's message, and the galaxy would never be the same. The red warning lights flashed across the bridge of the Earth's Fury as Admiral Kate Sullivan watched the Council fleet drop out of hyperspace. 300 alien ships appeared in the space between Mars and Earth, their massive forms blotting out the stars. Each ship was larger than anything humans had ever built, and their weapons were already powering up. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the lead Council ship," reported Lieutenant Commander Tony Martinez from the communications station. His voice was steady, but Kate could see the tension in his shoulders. "Put it through," Kate ordered. She stood at the center of the bridge, her uniform crisp despite the early morning hour. The Council had moved faster than expected. Arriving only 18 hours after Ambassador Carter's refusal, the main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of an alien vessel. War Prime Gorthek filled the display, a massive creature that looked like a cross between a bear and a rhinoceros. His thick armor was covered in scars, and his small eyes glowed with a red light that spoke of countless battles. "Human Admiral," Gorthek said in a voice like grinding stone. "I am War Prime Gorthek of the Council Fleet. Your species has made a foolish choice. I offer you one final chance to surrender before we demonstrate why no species has ever successfully defied the Galactic Council." Kate looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. There were 47 men and women from a dozen different countries, all volunteers who had chosen to serve on humanity's most advanced warship. They had trained for this moment, though none of them had expected it to come so soon. "War Prime Gorthek," Kate replied. "I am Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Earth Defense Force. Humanity has made its choice. We will not surrender our freedom to you or anyone else." Gorthek's massive head tilted slightly. "Your bravery is noted, Admiral. But bravery will not save you from the consequences of your defiance. My fleet carries enough firepower to turn your planet into molten rock. Your 47 ships are no match for our 300. "Then you should have brought more ships," Kate said calmly. The alien commander's eyes narrowed. "You humans are either very brave or very stupid. I have not decided which, but it does not matter. The result will be the same." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Kate looked at the tactical display where the Council fleet was arranging itself in a perfect battle formation. Their ships moved with precision that spoke of thousands of years of military experience. "Orders, Admiral?" asked Commander Steve Roberts, her second in command. He was a veteran of the Mars Colony Wars, and his calm demeanor helped steady the younger crew members. "All ships, battle stations," Kate announced over the fleet communication system. "This is what we train for. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every human being who will ever be born. Make every shot count." The 47 ships of the Earth Defense Force spread out in a defensive formation around Earth. They were outnumbered more than 6-1. But Kate had spent months studying the tactics of alien warfare. The Council had become comfortable with their overwhelming technological advantage. They had forgotten that desperate enemies could be unpredictable. "Admiral," called out the sensor operator, Ensign Lisa Park, "the Council ships are moving into attack position. They're targeting our orbital defense platforms first." Kate nodded. The platforms were humanity's first line of defense, but they were also stationary targets. The Council would destroy them quickly to clear the way for their assault on Earth. "Let them," Kate said. "All ships maintain position. Do not engage until they reach the Mars orbit line." Commander Roberts looked confused. "Admiral, shouldn't we try to protect the platforms? The platforms are already lost," Kate replied. "But their destruction will tell us something important about Council weapons and tactics. We need that information more than we need a few extra defensive positions." The Council fleet opened fire with weapons that turned space itself into a light show. Beams of pure energy lanced out from their ships, striking the orbital platforms with devastating effect. Each platform exploded in a ball of fire and debris, completely destroyed by single shots. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Martinez. "Each of those platforms had enough armor to stop a nuclear missile?" Now we know what we're dealing with, Kate said. But notice something else. Look at how they're firing. The crew studied the tactical display as the Council ships continued their advance. The alien vessels were firing in perfect coordination, each ship taking a designated target. There was no waste, no confusion, no individual initiative. They're following a preset battle plan, observed Commander Roberts. Every ship knows exactly what it's supposed to do. Exactly, Kate said. They've been winning battles the same way for thousands of years. Overwhelming firepower, perfect coordination, and enemies who are too frightened to fight effectively. The Council fleet finished destroying the orbital platforms and continued toward Earth. As they crossed the Mars orbit line, Kate gave the order she had been waiting to give. All ships, attack pattern Delta, target their lead vessels and fire everything we have. The human fleet suddenly accelerated toward the Council ships, their weapons blazing. The aliens had expected the humans to try to defend Earth from a distance, but instead the human ships were charging directly at them. "Admiral, this is suicide," shouted the tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Janet Rodriguez. "We can't fight them at close range. We can't fight them at long range either," Kate replied. "But close range is where our advantages matter most." The human ships dove into the Council formation like wolves attacking a flock of sheep. The aliens tried to adjust their perfect battle plan, but they had never faced an enemy that was willing to ram their ships or fight at point-blank range. The Earth's Fury led the charge, its nuclear missiles streaking toward the Council flagship. The alien shields absorbed most of the damage, but Kate had expected that. The real purpose of the attack was to get close enough for the next phase of her plan. "All ships prepare for ramming speed," Kate ordered. "Target their shield generators and engines." The human ships began ramming the Council vessels, using their smaller size and greater maneuverability to get inside the aliens' defenses. The Council ships were designed to fight at long range, and their massive weapons couldn't target enemies that were literally on top of them. "Admiral, the Council ships are trying to retreat," reported the sensor operator. "They're pulling back too." "Regroup. Don't let them," Kate said. "All ships, stay with your targets. If they want to retreat, they'll have to drag us with them." The battle turned into a close-quarters nightmare for the Council fleet. Human ships attached themselves to alien vessels like parasites, using boarding pods and cutting tools to break through their hulls. The aliens found themselves fighting hand-to-hand combat in their own ships, something they had never experienced before. Captain Jake Morrison, who had transferred from the Terran Hope to lead one of the assault teams, reported over the communication system. "Admiral, we've taken the Council cruiser Dominion. The aliens don't know how to fight inside their own ships." "Excellent work, Jake," Kate replied. "Use their own weapons against them." The captured Council ships began firing on their former allies, creating chaos in the alien formation. The perfect battle plan was collapsing as human boarding parties seized control of more and more vessels. War-primed Gorthak's voice crackled over the communication system. "This is impossible. No species fights like this. You are destroying the natural order of warfare." "We're not fighting by your rules," Kate replied. "We're fighting by ours." The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was becoming clear. The Council fleet, despite its overwhelming technological advantage, was being defeated by an enemy that refused to fight in the expected way. Human ships continued to ram, board, and capture alien vessels, turning the Council's own weapons against them. "Admiral," called out Commander Roberts, "the Council fleet is in full retreat. They're abandoning the field." Kate watched the tactical display as the surviving Council ships fled toward the edge of the solar system. Of the 300 ships that had arrived to conquer humanity, fewer than 50 were still functional. The rest had been destroyed or captured by the smaller human fleet. "All ships do not pursue," Kate ordered. "Let them go. They need to carry word back to the Council about what happened here." The bridge erupted in cheers as the crew realized what they had accomplished. Humanity had faced the most powerful military force in the galaxy and won. It seemed impossible, but the evidence was right there on the sensors. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Martinez. "We're receiving a transmission from Earth. President Brooks wants to speak with you." Kate smiled for the first time since the battle began. "Put her through. I think we have some good news to report." The war was not over, but humanity had proven something important. They had shown that the Council could be defeated, that their perfect military machine could be broken by enemies who were willing to fight for their freedom. The galaxy would never be the same again. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike any meeting in the organization's 10,000-year history. High Counselor Zethkar stood at the center of the great chamber, his forearms trembling with rage and disbelief. Around him, representatives from 200 species sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just heard. "Impossible," whispered the Valkyrie delegate, his tree-like form swaying as if in a strong wind. "The humans destroyed most of the Council." "Fleet? How can this be?" War Prime Gorthak's image flickered on the main display screen, transmitted from his damaged flagship as it limped back toward Council space. The massive creature's armor was scorched and dented, and one of his arms hung uselessly at his side. "I have never seen anything like it," Gorthak reported, his voice filled with confusion and fear. "The humans fought like madmen. They rammed our ships, boarded our vessels, and fought us hand-to-hand inside our own hulls. They turned our own weapons against us," the Morthi representative hissed loudly. "But they are primitives. Their technology is centuries behind ours. How could they defeat the Council's finest warriors?" "Their technology did not matter," Gorthak replied. "They were willing to die for their freedom. Every human we fought was ready to sacrifice their life to destroy just one of our ships. We have never faced an enemy like this." High Counselor Zethkar's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "This changes nothing. We will send a larger fleet. We will bring 1,000 ships if necessary. Humanity will be crushed for their defiance." But even as he spoke, Zethkar knew that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in the Council's history, their military had been defeated by a supposedly inferior species. Word of the battle was already spreading throughout the galaxy, and the implications were staggering. "High Counselor," said a new voice from the back of the chamber. The speaker was Ambassador Kratesh of the Andorian Republic, a species that had submitted to the Council only 50 years ago. "Perhaps we should consider that the humans have shown us something important." Zethkar turned his black eyes toward the Andorian. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the humans are not the problem. Maybe the problem is us." Kratesh stood up, his blue skin shimmering under the chamber lights. "We have ruled the galaxy through fear and intimidation for 10,000 years. We have never asked if there was a better way." A murmur ran through the chamber as other representatives began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Andorian's words were dangerously close to treason against the Council's authority. "You speak of rebellion," Zethkar said menacingly. "Have you forgotten what happens to species that defy the Council?" "No," Kratesh replied calmly. "But I have seen what happens to species that are willing to fight for their freedom. The humans have shown us that the Council can be defeated. They have proven that your power is not absolute." Before Zethkar could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the Council station. The massive structure shuddered as if something had struck it. Emergency lights flashed and the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. "What is happening?" demanded the High Counselor. A technician rushed into the chamber, his uniform torn and his face pale with fear. "High Counselor, we are receiving reports from across the galaxy. Dozens of species are refusing to pay their tributes. The Jorvaki have declared independence. The Telrani have seized their mining colonies. The Quantari have destroyed their council." Overseers. The chamber erupted in chaos as representatives began shouting questions and demands. The carefully maintained order of the council was collapsing as subject species throughout the galaxy followed humanity's example. "How many species are in open rebellion?" Zethkar asked. 47 and counting," the technician replied. "The number is growing every hour. They are all saying the same thing that the humans said. Which is? No. The single word hit the chamber like a physical blow. For 10,000 years, the Council had ruled through the simple principle that resistance was futile. But humanity had proven that resistance was possible, and that knowledge was spreading like wildfire throughout the galaxy. On Earth, President Helen Brooks stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, addressing the world through every available media channel. Behind her, the flags of all the nations of Earth flew side by side, a symbol of the unity that had made humanity's victory possible. "My fellow humans," she began, "today we have achieved something that was thought impossible. We have stood up to the most powerful force in the galaxy and won. But our victory is not just about us. It is about every sentient being in the galaxy who dreams of freedom." She paused to look directly into the camera. "We have received messages from dozens of species who are now fighting for their own independence. The Galactic Council's empire of fear is crumbling, and we are proud to have struck the first blow for freedom." Aboard the Earth's Fury, Admiral Kate Sullivan watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy. Her ship was still in Earth orbit, undergoing repairs from the battle, but the crew was monitoring the galactic communication networks. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Commander Martinez, "we're getting a transmission from the Andorian fleet. They're requesting permission to form an alliance with Earth." Kate smiled. "Tell them we welcome all species who believe in freedom. The galaxy is going to need a new form of government, and we're going to help build it." Meanwhile, Ambassador Lisa Carter was preparing for another historic meeting. She had been invited to address the newly formed Galactic Assembly, a gathering of the species that had broken free from Council control. The meeting was being held on the neutral world of New Geneva, a planet that had been chosen for its distance from Council space. The Assembly Hall was much smaller than the Council's grand chamber, but it was filled with hope instead of fear. Representatives from 63 species sat in simple chairs, all equal in status and voice. There were no thrones, no elevated platforms, no symbols of domination. "Friends," Lisa began, "we gather here not as rulers and subjects, but as equals. We have all learned the same lesson, that freedom is not something that can be given to you. It is something you must take for yourself and defend with your life." The assembled representatives applauded, but it was different from the forced obedience of the Council chamber. This was genuine enthusiasm from beings who had chosen to be free. "The old galaxy is dying," Lisa continued. "The Council's empire of fear is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. But we are not here to replace one tyranny with another. We are here to build something new, something based on cooperation instead of domination." As she spoke, reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy. The Council's fleet was in retreat on a dozen fronts. 3 of the core Council worlds had declared independence. High Counselor Zethkar himself had been forced to flee his own station when the guards mutinied. The transformation of the galaxy was happening faster than anyone had imagined possible. Within weeks, the Council's 10,000-year empire had been reduced to a handful of worlds and a few loyal species. The rest of the galaxy was free, and they had humanity's simple no to thank for it. 6 months later, Ambassador Carter stood once again before a galactic assembly. But this time she was not delivering a message of defiance. She was presenting humanity's proposal for a new galactic government based on equality and mutual respect. "The old Council demanded tribute from subject species," she said. "The new assembly will offer assistance to member species. The old Council ruled through fear. The new assembly will lead through example." The vote was unanimous. Every species in the assembly agreed to the new charter, and humanity was granted a seat as an equal partner in the galactic community. As the ceremony concluded, Lisa thought back to the moment when she had stood before the Council and delivered humanity's one-word response. That single word had changed everything, not just for humans, but for every species in the galaxy. "No" had been the beginning of the end for the Council's empire of fear. But it had also been the beginning of something new, a galaxy where freedom was not just a dream, but a reality that every sentient being could enjoy. The age of the Galactic Council was over. The age of the Galactic Assembly had begun. And it all started with one species that had the courage to say one word, no. Humanity had not just won their freedom. They had won freedom for the entire galaxy. And that was a victory worth celebrating.